A big thank you to my colleague Thumeka Mantolo from the Research Office, because she is the person responsible for dealing with all the complex administration of ensuring that our accredited research outputs are reported to DHET, and therefore we get the funding for them. And so she is going to be taking us through this talk this afternoon to just explain how the accredited research outputs works and how Rhodes University participates in the system. I should note that the idea to provide funding for research outputs was very much part of the revised funding formula in 2004, where it was decided that in order to engage in this so-called knowledge economy, we need to provide incentives to universities to really drive research output. Up to that point, research output was relatively limited, partially because of the academic sanctions against South Africa under apartheid, but also because of the kind of limited and fragmented nature of our higher education system. So there was this idea that we needed to ramp up our research output to participate in the knowledge economy. And the decision taken by the then Department of Education was to include funding to universities to recognize the dissemination of knowledge. Unfortunately, dissemination of knowledge is not something that is easily captured and recognized, and so they decided to use the proxy of research publications. And I just want to point that out, because sometimes I've heard academics and postgraduate students talk about getting published as if that was the desire, that was the outcome, that was the goal. And we need to remember that the funding for research publications is a proxy for research dissemination, and that our goal is to try and get knowledge out there, to get people in the particular knowledge community to know about our knowledge, and for us to read about knowledge being produced by others in our field. So this use of funding for research outputs as a proxy for knowledge dissemination, of course, was successful, but did bring some unintended consequences. And one of the unintended consequences, which the DHET have tried to clamp down on, is that a number of universities pay incentives either in research codes or in some cases as direct commission to academics as part of their salary. Now, Rhodes University doesn't do that, and UCT doesn't do that, but all other universities in South Africa have one form or another of incentives paid either directly or indirectly to researchers. I think there are very good reasons why we don't do it, but that's something we can discuss later. But I thought I'd start off by saying that, because a lot of academics who perhaps are new to Rhodes University may not be aware that this paying of incentives to academics is actually something the DHET have tried to prevent and to stop, even if it is perhaps a logical consequence of the DHET paying incentives to universities. Perhaps it's not surprising that many universities then pay incentives to their academics to try and get more research outputs. But before I get off this particular soapbox, I just want to reiterate that, of course, the goal is not numbers of publications. The goal is better dissemination of knowledge. And I think it's really important that we hold on to that goal, even while the system might sometimes confuse us and make us think that our aim is to get more and more publications on our CV rather than to participate more and more actively in knowledge building. And with that little sermon said, I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Thumeka, who will take us through the nuts and bolts of how this all actually happens. Thank you very much for your time, Thumeka. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Sue. Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Thumeka Mantolo. I'm the manager for research administration. We are in the research office. It is in the main admin building. So this afternoon, I'm gonna just talk to, I'm listening to Sue and thinking there's actually a lot that we can discuss on this. But for me, it will only be on processes. So the processes that we follow, because with all of the work we're doing, we are guided by the policy. And this policy, as Sue said, it started in 2003. So it was signed off in 2003, effective 2004. But over time, there was a need to revise it. So it was revised 2005. And from 2016, we started to submit on the new policy. And if I recall correctly, the reason why the policy was revised was mainly to look into the general indices that were at the time considered to be accredited, because those were very few and they were not serving the purpose that it was needed. So there was a need to relook at that. I remember at the time I was still working for the Department of Higher Education. We had to do an exercise to look into what other indices that the universities are using to publish that are not part of the policy at that time. So from there, these indices were then added, new indices were added, and there was a decision that they will be added ongoing basis instead of having just a set number in the policy. And one of the other things this was done was to also give a recognition to the importance of book publications, because in terms of units, the books at the time were just not getting enough. I mean, I remember it was just based on the number of pages in the chapter. So that was the way the units were calculated. So there was a revision in terms of the units for books as well. And going back to my slides, so Rhodes University, we submit our subsidy to DHET each year for allocation of government subsidy. And as I've said, this is a vital process because it has direct influence on the amount of funding we receive from government. So our role in this office is to make sure that everything that is out there under the name of Rhodes University is counted for, so we get subsidy in return. I mean, there's been a lot of challenges in this regard because sometimes things are published and we don't get to know about them. So there's still room to make sure that 100% of publications are recorded and are reported to DHET. And then just two extracts that I've put out from the policy. This document is available on the website. I can also share it after the presentation. So they describe the purpose of the policy as to encourage research productivity by rewarding quality research output. So the policy, as Sue said, it's not intended to measure all outputs because we have only 3 categories, that is journals, books, book chapters, and conferences. So recently, we were just talking about it now, we've got creative outputs as the 4th category. We've only submitted 2 submissions under creative outputs, but I didn't include it for this purpose. I'm just gonna talk about journals, books, and conference proceedings. So the procedure for submitting to DHET is that we use N-1. So what the N-1 means is that in 2021, we're submitting publications that were out in 2020. So it's the current year -1. So next year, we will be putting in publications of 2021. They are reported in 2022. There is also room for late submissions, but it has to be motivated. For example, if we're talking about a late claim in terms of the local journals, sometimes production is late and then a volume comes out the following year because they have to match up if they're doing volume 7. So it has to come after volume 6. So there has to be a motivation from the editor explaining that. And then with books, we will have to say why the book is late, whether it was delay in print or delay in getting the hard copy from the academic that had published in that book. So, but the focus is N-1. There's also something to highlight there when it comes to new academics that employed by the university. So the N-1, so if you're coming to Rhodes in 2021 and you had done research at another university, say UCT, the policy is strict on that. Subsidy belongs to the university where research was conducted. So you cannot come with that publication that you had worked on while at UCT and claim it at Rhodes in 2021. It will still belong to the previous institution where subsidy was conducted. And in terms of the evaluation of these outputs in Pretoria, that's where the panel sits, they have the main committee, and then they have sub-panels that looks at specific field of research. Like they have a panel that looks at humanities, science, and all that. And the main panel is chaired by our DVC. So that is extra pressure for us as the office, because when it comes to this submission, they look at the quality. You have to make sure that you follow the criteria. Supporting documentation is there with hard copies, highlighting of what needs to be highlighted is there, the actual submission, all support evidence. So we really spend a lot of time on this. This is one of our biggest projects as the office. And back to the categories, as I've said, there are 3 at the moment, with the 4th one being the creative outputs. The articles that are on the DHET accredited journals, the peer review, and here peer review, emphasis being on the peer review book chapters and peer review books. With all books that we're submitting, we need to produce evidence that an independent peer review was conducted, not after, prior to publication. So that has to be a letter from the publisher, a letter from the editor, but the editor of the book cannot be contributing if they are providing the peer review evidence. So it has to be independent. This, again, has been a real struggle for us in the office. We spend so much time emailing publishers, asking for these letters. And I remember the last discussion we've had with DHET, they were saying they will consider having a list of accredited publishers, because we find that reputable publishers, say like Routledge, will say on their letter, the peer review took place at a proposal stage. And now DHET will say, no, that's not enough or that's not sufficient. We would want the peer review to be on the full manuscript. Then we get a rejection just because the wording is saying proposal stage. And then you get another editor of that publication giving you a letter that states that it was performed for the full manuscript. Then you get that accepted. So you can see the disparity, so it doesn't make sense. If it's Routledge, one would think that the process is the same. So there has to be a different way to do this, because with the local ones, which the local publishers like your HSRC, UKZN Press, we get perfect letters. It's like almost they are saying what they know that the DHET wants to hear, because they have done this for so long. And then it ticks the boxes, but you can never be sure whether the international publisher with so much reputation is then not sufficient for that panel because of just the words, you know. And then lastly, the peer review conference proceedings. And then again there, it has to be published conference proceedings. So in this regard, presentations made at a conference, they don't count if it doesn't move to being published, where it will get an ISBN and have a peer review statement as well. And just before I go from that, the other thing I want to mention with conference proceedings, recently we had a conference that was hosted by Rhodes. So the rule there is that if, as an institution, you're hosting a conference, the contribution of that institution that is hosting should not be more than 25%. So that's a problem. So we always want to make sure that if the contents page has about 15 papers, so less than 25% of that should be from the institution, but if all, then the whole conference stand a chance of being rejected. So they want it to be a spread of contribution from international and from other local universities. And then back again to the journals, which journals are recognized. As I've said, the policy, what's nice now about this policy, which is the 2013 one, instead of having a list that is a set list, they add on it. So they've got about 6, last year we had 6 that were accredited. Now we have more because there's also now the Director of Open Access that's just been added. So the silo is administered by ASAF, and then DHET is the one where we apply from the Department of Higher Education. So there's 2 local from the list, and then the rest are international. I have been getting emails from academics asking what to do to get a journal listed under these indices. So unfortunately, the process is that we don't get involved to have a journal accredited under Web of Science, IBSS. We can only assist with the DHET list, because that one we do have an opportunity to submit a local journal, and then it gets reviewed, and then they respond whether to say it would be accredited, and then accreditation follows the next cycle. But with the international ones, we don't get involved at all. So it is up to the editors of the journals to have their journals listed under these international indices. Yes, as mentioned, the department works with ASAF on this to evaluate which journals get approved. And then if they no longer fulfill, I think they do review a 3-year review. And then if they find that it no longer fulfills the criteria, it is then reassessed, and then it is removed from the list. So again, editors of local journals can put forward submissions via the research office to have their journals accredited. And the deadline is always 15th June each year. So what we get at the beginning of each year, we get a new list from the department. And with that new list, you will find that some journals, that's why you find that a journal you've used in the previous year, and then you say, oh, what's happening? It's not there. So it does happen that a journal can fall off the list. So that's why we make sure that each year we give a list. This list is on our website, and it's also sent on the research mailing list to make sure that beginning of the year, it's probably something between Feb and March, we get a new list. So the list we're working on now is a 2021. And with that list, we've got a new index that we're going to be reporting on the Directory of Open Access. So next year will be the first time that we're using that as part of the list. And we'll do the same with our system that we're using for reporting. We'll make sure it's uploaded there, and then the journal will appear as accredited. All the journals that are under that index will appear as accredited. So the process for this accreditation for journals is that we have to submit an audited report. So as much as we do the verification on our side to see if a journal is accredited or not, we then go a step further to appoint auditors to do the cross-checking. One of the other things that the auditors do here is to check if the person that's claiming is in fact a staff member of the university. So in cases of collaboration with students, if that publication comes up as an audit sample, we have to put in to prove student records to show that the student was in fact a student of Rhodes University at the time of publishing. This is the same for honorary appointments. So those people will not be on the HR database, as it were, but we do have official letters. So we have to always make sure we confirm the link to the university. So we can't just say, so the discussion we've had with head of departments is that if it happens that a person comes for a visiting, like a visiting professor, they come for more than, let's say more than 2 months, and then there's a publication that comes from that, there should be at least a way of recording it on the system that they get a reference number, sort of a identifier that year they were here at Rhodes. And then for that reason, when that publication comes, we can claim, but we will of course have a support letter showing that so-and-so was a visiting professor at Rhodes for this period, and then that's acceptable. But what we don't do is just claim if a person doesn't have any connection to the university. And then here I just had to draw a cycle that shows the work we do in terms of this process. So I think my cycle is a bit skewed, but this is where it starts. This is the research office. At us, we communicate to the HODs and the academic, the research community, the internal deadline. So for example, the system is going to open next month for loading of 2021 publication. So that's gonna be going out. The administrators or the individual academics will then start capturing their outputs for 2021. This is via our system. We use a system on Protea called Research Management. I know with COVID-19, having been working remotely, this was a big challenge because for you to access the system, if you are off campus, you have to have VPN. If you don't have VPN installed, then you have a problem. And then we found that this year, we start capturing September up to the following year. So we found as we were counting our subsidy or our publications, the majority of our publications are from journals. So we were counting, we were like, oh gosh, what does this mean? Did we publish less because we have a previous year to sort of do comparison? And then we realized that actually that was not the case, but these publications were not reported on the research management system. So luckily we do have access to Scopus searches. So we then had to make time to do those searches to find more publications from Rhodes. So we spent about 3 weeks trying to search for them and then the report that came from Scopus identifier showed that they were there, but it's a matter of a person not capturing. There could be a lot of reasons for that. It could be they got irritated with the VPN connection and the errors with the system, and they just didn't do it at all, or at the time they were not available to be contacted by HOD to report. So there are a number of reasons, but what we prefer is that if you are not able to go to the system, at least send it in a Word document. I mean, that's not what we want to do. We don't want to do it ourselves because we've got lots to do after. But as long as we have it, then we will make sure that it's recorded. The problem is that if it's not recorded at all, then we don't get what is due to the university in terms of that publication. So from Protea, then its hard copy is submitted to the research office. In this instance, it will then be electronic copies because we're taking away hard copies. We'll prefer to get the copies of the journals, PDF, or just the link to the journal, and then we can source it ourselves. And then if it's a book, we do still want to get the hard copy of the book, but if it's available on ebook, even better, because now we're using a system that's, that allows us to upload ebooks. And then we do verification, screening. We request additional information. As I've mentioned before, the emphasis here will be on these peer reviews. We spend a lot of time on emails doing these peer review letter requests. We would wish to get to a point where we don't have to, but at the moment we're still doing that. So it will help if, as an academic was published in a book chapter, you just send your book together with the peer review letter. That's even better. And then we prepare for the audit, which is for journals. That goes to the auditors, and then the internal review committee. So one of the things that the policy says is that there should be a panel of experts in the university or reps of certain departments that sit in one room and look at the submission of the university, and then they sign off on it. So we've done this previously for books and for conferences, but journals, that's not necessary because a journal, it's either it's accredited or it's not accredited. So there's nothing to look at. But for the books, they do need to sit and look at these because they look at the scholarly nature, whether it is subsidy and potential subsidy earning or not. And as I've said, likely our DVC chairs these committees, so he knows what will qualify for subsidy and what will not. So for us as administrators, it's always best to submit what we think would qualify, because we get reports, and on those reports, we are given percentage of, say, success on submission. So this year, we got 96%, which is good. So it means of the books we submitted, only 4% was rejected. And then that rejection, that 4% had nothing to do with the quality of the submission or the support documentation. It was just rejected on the scholarly nature of the publication, which is good for us. Then it means we've done our job. But if someone insists on their publication being submitted, but we know it's not going to earn subsidy, then we're just running a risk of having a higher rejection rate, because at the end it's going to come back, it will be rejected. With the new policy, there is room for appeal, which is something that was not there in the previous one. So this year, we got outcomes of 2019. So with those outcomes, that's at 70%, 97% and 4% rejected. With that 4%, if we feel that the reason for rejection are questionable and we don't think that's the case, we have an opportunity to submit that output for appeal. We put together documentation and say why we think it should be looked at again. But there's no guarantee, but we just have to do it with the appeal, and then we see what happens. And then journals goes to auditors. Auditors give us the audit report, and then the internal panel, as I've said, and then 15th May, that's the date. We submit, goes off to DHET, and then that's it. And as some of you know, this year I had problems because Jill McGregor, who used to work with us on this process, resigned. I had to get a temp to assist. So instead of the 15th of May, we submitted end of May, first week of June. Just 2 weeks, but it was fine. They allowed us that extension. But the point is that with all this, we don't want to miss the deadline, because it has to be 15th May, because they have their own timelines that they work around to make sure the report of outcomes gets to us on time. And then with all this, there's always an annual sector report that shows some recommendations, observations, And that report is available online, or if anyone is interested to read, just to see how we compare to the sector and all of that. I mean, I'm happy to share that. And then Rhodes University percentage share on these publications. So having done this for this long, we've noticed that our share is mainly, I mean, our publications are mainly from journal articles. This can go up to 85% in a year. So our submission, the biggest bulk of it comes from journal articles. And then we have books and book chapters. I mean, books, they differ. This year you might find you have less, and then the following year you'll have more. So it can go up to 15% of our submission. And then the conferences, they take the smaller slides, which is 5% or so. And these are easy to do because they don't require so many support documentation. And then calculation of units. So accredited or approved journals. So a research article published in an approved journals will get you will get the university a single unit. That's 1 unit. That is if all authors are affiliated to the claiming institution. So in the case where the authors are affiliated to 2 or more, then the subsidy will be shared. So just to explain this, I'm publishing with someone at NMU. So Rhodes will get 0.5 for my share, NMU will get a 0.5. But in a case where it's an international collaborator, I'm publishing here at Rhodes with a colleague at University of Toronto. Unfortunately, I still get a 0.5. There's been debates on this that actually it's not encouraging international collaborations. But the response we got from DHET was that no, it's the 0.5 is not lost because it goes back to the port. Going back to the port, then in a sense that because this is one budget and the share in terms of the units that are given to the institution will then affect the rent value. So then that unit from the international collaborator will just go back to that the slice is bigger for sharing. So if you publishing with international collaborators, it's good for you, but at the same time, we're getting less because if there are 4 of you, then we get a 0.25. So talking about the rent value, I think the last time I checked, it was something around 125,000. So 1 unit will get us 125,000. And they've always said that with all this happening, at least it will never get to a point that it's below 100,000, because these were the questions that the sector was asking when they introduced the accreditation of creative outputs. So the question was, is there more money for creative outputs? And the answer is no, we're still looking for more money, but it's still the same pie. So then it means the slicing. It means more money. The creative outputs will have to get a share. And as you know, maybe our university doesn't have lots to submit on creative outputs, and then other universities have. So you're still fighting for the slice of the same pie. But the answer was that, okay, we'll make sure that the rent value of the unit still remains within 100,000 and above. And then back to books and book chapters. So as I've said, with the policy that started in 2004, the books were really not being recognized there. So it was then agreed that there should be more units given to books. And now a book may be subsidized to a maximum of 10 units. 10 units, this is dependent on the number of pages within the book. So if I can just explain the maximum. So 300, a book that is 300 or above will definitely get us 10. But if it's anything under 300, there's then a calculation that applies. But as the UNESCO definition of a book must be 60 pages and above. So 60 pages to 90, probably 1 unit, because there's a gap on terms of the pages. So the start page being 60 up to 90, maybe 1. I didn't put that here, but definitely a 300 pages book will get 10 units. And again, in a case where the authors are affiliated to Rhodes, we get the 10. But if there are authors from different universities, we share the 10. And then the chapters are subsidized to a maximum of 1 unit based here. Then this is based on the numbers of chapters in the book. So again, I've raised this, that actually it's not benefiting these. I find there's also these books that are a combination of, what do you call them? So where you will have about 20 chapters. So it will be a study of South Africa in a certain topic, and then there will be another country, India. So there will be contributors from different countries, and you will find that that collection will take you to 30 chapters in one book. So you know what that 30 means? It means we're sharing the 30 by 10. So that calculation also doesn't make sense, because they are saying the many the chapters in the book, the less you get in terms of units. So 10 chapters in the book, that's what they're saying, 10 chapters in a book. So with the 10, 1, 1, 1, 1, up to 10. But immediately the chapters go above 10, then you start to share, it will be less. And then with conference papers, again, there's a requirement that it should meet the DHET criteria. They will get half a unit. This is a 0.5. So a 0.5 for a sole authored conference paper, and then a share again if it's different authors. I thought it's important to just share again our publication trends in the past 5 years. So what we have here is books and book chapters, conference proceedings, journal articles. So starting from 2014 up to 2019, as I've said, 2019 being the latest data we'll have available, because 2020 was submitted this year, end of June, end of May, first week of June. So as you can see, our biggest share in terms of the units, as I've said, it's from journal articles. So journal articles are getting us more than 400 units each year, and then followed by books, 50, 48, 47. This is something we've seen before, that with books, sometimes you get more, sometimes you, because this also is dependent on how many full books we have. Because as I've said, a full book will earn us more units. So sometimes in 1 year, we won't have any full books, we'll just have chapters. And then that will show in terms of the units that we get. And then conference proceedings, they're always sitting at the 20s. We even had less in 2018, not sure what happened there. And then with 2020, we're expecting to even have a decrease again, because we found that the conferences that were organized were either canceled or postponed. So we didn't have a lot of outputs in conferences for 2020. And then I thought, just to end off, it will just be good to share the positive. This screen shows how we as the university compare to the sector in terms of our publication. This is what they call the per capita research publication output. So this is normalized in terms of the head count. So they take the permanent staff that are at Rhodes, and then they look at the number of publication units that we get. So you can see this is now 2018, as I've said above, 2018, we got 547, and then those are our units here, 549, sorry. So that's our 549, and then they take that and they divide it by the number of staff, and then we get the per capita. So that is 1.5 4. So this is something that I've done to say in a university, kind of the normative output, they expect each staff member to produce 1.5. That is, at least you should have in a year 1 article, sole authored article, and then maybe co-authoring on other things. So they expect that a staff member at one university will meet that normative output, which is below 1. So I think we're doing okay because we're still within the top 5 or the top 7. So UP this year, this is 2018, was leading with 1.71, and then Stellenbosch, Wits, and then there's RU with 1.54, followed by UKZN. And then the 2019 numbers, still there. We did the same as the previous year. We performed at 1.54. But you see, if you're looking at the first one, now being UKZN, the normative or the per capita has increased. So with the previous year, UP was there with a 1.71, but now UKZN has moved up with 1.8. So it means it's the competition in this. So it's not that we're doing anything wrong, but it means the numbers. So these reports that I mentioned earlier, the sector reports, so for those that are good at data analysis and all that, they will tell you the reasons for these change in per capita units. So UKZN is obviously doing something right because their research publication units are going up. And then for that reason, they have now gotten a bigger per capita unit. I think that's it. Yes, thank you. That is the end of my slides.
Thank you so much, Thumeka. So many interesting issues and debates are within that presentation. I think it raises so many questions about why we publish in the first place, where we should publish, how the university gets recognized, the effectiveness of these systems to both drive knowledge creation and dissemination, but potentially also to drive all sorts of game playing behaviors, which can give us short-term successes, but perhaps long-term are not good for the knowledge creation endeavor. So that was really very informative, very eye-opening. I think let's have a few questions. We've got 15 minutes for questions and answers. Anyone got anything or comments? There's been some interesting conversations in the chat. I don't know if anyone would like to raise their hand to talk to their comments. I think I'm going to throw a question. Bernard's got a nice question there. Yes, I know what the answer is. Yes. Do the responsibilities of being heads of department or dean end up stifling your ability to conduct research? Absolutely. And I think this is something that the early career researchers in the room need to consider carefully. You know, there are multiple kinds of academic careers: administrative careers, management careers, research careers, teaching careers, and many of them overlap in many ways. But sometimes you do have to make choices about where you spend your time, and those are not easy choices. We've got quite a few librarians in the room. I've seen quite a few names. I see let's have a look. We've got Debbie, we've got Jill. I saw some other names. Anyway, I did see a whole lot of librarians in the room. Sue, Tandiwe, Wetu, nice to have you with us, and of course Vainant. And I just thought that it might be worth throwing to any of you, if any of you are willing to respond to the inclusion of the DOHA, which for the first time ever, as Thumeka pointed out, the Directory of Open Access Journals is included in the list of accredited journals. So if you publish in any of the journals on the DOHA, then it will automatically count for subsidy. This is a huge breakthrough, and I know it's been quite controversial, but I wonder if the librarians can maybe speak to why this is important.
So if I may respond.
Great, thanks, Fernand.
Yes, I think, first of all, I would like to acknowledge what SF has done in terms of upping the quality of research outputs by South Africans. Watching the space and putting processes in place to do audits, etc. But I'm not. When I saw the DHET list being added to the list of accredited titles, I had mixed feelings. One, I'm very happy to see so many open access art journals being included, because that's always been a perception that, oh, it's open access, it's lesser quality, or it's predatory or questionable. So it was very good for them to acknowledge that through the DHET that the same kind of perception should be, whether it's a subscribed to art journal or an open access journal. But at the same time, through the work that I've been doing as part of my studies and for something else, I have picked up that even on the DHET list, in as much as you have on the Scopus list and some of the OneWiz list and etc., there are questionable titles in those indices and those platforms, or hosted on those platforms. And that worries me. And at the same time, as I mentioned in the chat box, what I can't understand is that there's publishers that adhere to the ethical list of requirements that COPE and other bodies like COPE has set. I think that there's also the medical one. But those titles are not included, which I can't understand. So you have a publisher that is that ensures that all their processes are ethical and adhere to high quality outputs. They're not included, but you find questionable titles on some of our normal lists. But I'm happy with the open access titles receiving the same kind of recognition. It's a step in the right direction. But I think a lot more has to be done to ensure that the DHET group continues to watch the editorial processes closely. And possibly, I think the one thing I would like to see going forward is that there's an agreement, and this is something I'm working on to actually look at the disparities between the various bodies. Why does one body have one set of criteria which might overlap to some extent with another body or organization? Can't there be a single international standard that's applied across all of these as a minimum standard at least? So that's just my perception on this.
Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. This is not a conversation that's finished. The open access conversation, I think we're finding our way, but more and more it is clear that this is really the only socially just way to move forward, but we need to have some kind of sense of what counts as quality. Any other questions or comments? I wonder if I can actually ask. Yes,
just to follow up on open access, Sue, the office, we pay APC article processing charges, and we're finding more and more that now these are going up. And one of the reasons is that there's a choice that you make to tick whether you want the journal to go open access. And unfortunately, I don't know if my colleagues at the library will help me here. As the office, we can only pay in rands up to 30,000. That's the limit because of budget issues, obviously. But because we're saying that we're supporting open access, then is there a fund? I mean, I don't know if we've had discussions where we're saying that the university has a pot that will support this open access fees. So that's just something that I haven't been able to figure out where we're at on that. So we're paying the article processing charges, but then there's also the question of the money for open access.
Absolutely. And I think that's such an important point. Open access is not free. It's free to the reader, But again, the author then ends up bearing the cost. And at Rhodes University, we're very small. We're the size of a faculty. Let's not forget that. And so our budget is very limited. So it will be it's quite a challenge, I think, to determine which open access to go for. And some open access, like I think of Crystal, a local journal, the university that hosts the journal covers the costs. And so that's free of charge to the authors. But then you get other open access, especially the gold standard open access, where you're paying a small fortune to get it published. And that raises real issues. Tom's got a question. Thumeka, I don't know if you can see Tom's question in the chat bar. Sometimes a book is based on previously published articles, modified into chapters. How is this taken into account for subsidy?
We submit this, but we need to give motivation, or we need to give something that sort of clarifies how much research has been done. So this is the same, I would say, with, say, a student has submitted their thesis, and then from that thesis, they published in a journal article. So there will be a note that says, this is based on my thesis. So for purposes of making sure that we don't do double dipping, we have to make sure we say the substantial revision to the original thesis. So there is room to submit, but we have to say that it has been substantially revised, and this is what we get from the author. So they have to say that to us, and then we sign it off.
Great, thank you. That makes
sense. For second editions, yeah, I think this is so if we're submitting a second edition, we have to say what changes from the first edition and all of that.
Okay, so they'll probably only pay subsidy for the additional chapter in the second edition, or the new forward, yes. Or right.
Yes. And just one other question I saw on the chat box. So I'm not good with typing. There was a question to do with how soon you can submit an article. Sometimes it will come out in a current year with the DOI. So in that case, as long as it's not saying in press. So if it's saying article in press, we leave it. But if it's published online, we submit it. And the good thing is that DHET has a system that will not allow duplicates. So if we're submitting it early, that's fine. We'll get our subsidy. And then when it comes out with now a year of 2020, and then we sort of confuse it and think that it needs to be submitted, the system will kick it out. So they will not, it's been claimed before.
Great. But ideally, am I right that as soon as it is officially out, even if it's out as a DOI, it's out online, it's maybe only a year or two later comes out on paper, but it is out there, it's fully published online, it's good to claim it immediately.
Claim it, yes. Yes, we need that count, yes. We don't wait.
We need money. We don't want to wait. Okay. But that money is, and I just want to reiterate something I said from the beginning, that money is not for us as individuals who have done the publication. Let us remember that we do this research, and this is certainly a personal view, and I know some of you may not share it, but we do this research as part of our job. That's for which we get salaries. And this funding comes as part of our government subsidy, and one certainly wouldn't get money for teaching. Well, you don't get money for our community engagement. That is part of our job. And so much the same thinking, although this money, we can in this case, we can clearly show that Rhodes University got X amount of money, and it got from this article, which has Sue McKenna's name on it. But I need to remember that, of course, Rhodes University has to also pay for buildings to get painted and air conditioning machines to get fixed and paper for the printer and the lawns to be mowed and the library to be stocked. And so I think that we sometimes, because publications are these individual units that emerge from our individual work sometimes and that have our individual names on it, and certainly we can claim that work as our own, I think we are inclined, I hear academics saying, but I'm the one who brought the money into the university, so I should get it. And I think sometimes we forget that it's the entire structure of the university that made it possible for us to do this work. This is just once again me trying to just pick up on some of the real problems that universities have had, where academics are being paid individual incentives, which since 2015, the DHET has stated very clearly should not be done, but universities continue to do this. And we've just seen such negative consequences, including a plethora of predatory publications, which thankfully we have not seen happening at Rhodes University. One last thing, if there's no other questions coming, but something I've wanted to ask Thumeka.
Yeah, I just want to say something, Sue, if I may.
Oh yes, Debbie, go for it.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt too much.
Not at all, go for it.
Yeah, with regards to what Wynand spoke about DOAJ, and I agree with him completely, but I also think that the DOAJ are trying very hard to keep up with open access publishing and open access publishing journals, and now and again something might creep through that might not be an open access journal, and that, you know, could be reviewed as a predatory journal. I still think that the DOAJ is a great resource for anybody to adhere to and to think about. But on the other side, we also are trying to work with the Rhodes University research report, where we are trying to make and link our research articles in that research report to the publisher's platform. So in a number of ways, the library and the research office are trying to make sure that your research output is made very visible to not only Africa, but to the global endeavor. And I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Debbie. Really such an important point.
And I think it also speaks to one of the questions on the chat box, or the comment rather, about editors of journals being recognized. I mean, all we can do is just make sure that that publication gets presented or published in our report. But as I said, with the policy, there's nothing that is earned for being an editor. So we get any subsidy or recognition for that.
Yeah, I would love to see that changed, because without the editors and the reviewers, many of whom are sitting in the participants list right now, we all spend hours and hours and hours doing that work. And I think it's really important work. And if we are going to reflect recognition for the research output, we've got to recognize all those who have a hand in it along the way. My question to you, Thumeka, is around, I mean, as you've heard from some of my comments, my own research, I'm always interested in how individuals game a system when the system seems to suggest that the desire is the proxy, i.e. the publication, instead of the actual goal, which is the dissemination of knowledge. Then you have individuals gaming that system. I'm interested in the extent to which universities as a whole institution are gaming this system. Now, it's very hard for you to respond to this question, but I have become increasingly aware of universities using relationships with external supposed research associates and claiming their publications, where the relationship with that research associate is tenuous, to say the least. So I know of a couple of universities that I won't mention here, where they have a number of high-performing academics who have never been to their campus, never been to South Africa, have not co-authored or been in a research project with any of their staff, and yet their publications are being claimed. Have you heard of this happening, and is there any means by which DHET is keeping an eye on this?
Yes, Sue, I would think so, because in reading the reports that they publish for the sector, they have picked up this practice, sort of unethical, where they go out of their way to make sure they get some kind of a connection to a professor who's overseas, who's never been to the university, but they get publications like 10 or 12 from that person, and then they claim. So the way I'm thinking, I don't know if this is the direction it's going, but now we are being asked to do demographics. So what we're submitting, so if I'm doing a journal under your name, I need to give details about you. So I need to say, what your staff number is, what position you hold in the university, are you permanent, those details. So I have a feeling, because I know with the data they have, they work very closely with the office of Johan Mouton. There's actually a report I'll share with the group that he put out last year, December. So those are the things that are mentioned in that report. So with this exercise of looking at the actual link to the university, who's permanent, who's on contract, they are trying now to make sure this normative or this per capita is actually a true reflection. Because if you're saying, I'm looking at the head count of 300 permanent staff members, but of that 300, and this is something that we also as Rhodes, we see it in our stats. So with the 300, if you take the names of the 300 academics, and then you compare it with the actual output that you're getting and submitting to DHET, you will find that only 100 of that 300 are counted for in terms of producing papers. And then the rest is people that are not permanent associates at all. So it is happening. I don't know the direction it's going to take, but at least for us, I know that with departments that have honorary appointments or honorary professors, at least there is a visit to the university. I mean, I don't know to what extent, but there is collaboration, or you'll find it with the papers, that if a paper is from that professor, it will also have a certain professor in that department. So to me, at least there is that collaboration, that it's part of people at Rhodes. But with others, so authored, no connection at all, but they get subsidy. So we will just watch that space to see what happens from the data that we're submitting in terms of who's permanent, who's on contract. And then, yeah.
Great. Yeah, thanks. It sounds like something that they are aware of and that they are clamping down on. Thank you, guys. We are now just past 3 o'clock, and I promised we'd be done by 3. There's so much for us to chat about in these kinds of issues, and it really just shows you how what we might see as a simple administrative system is actually far more complex, and it really raises issues about what research is for, what impact it can have, and how it should best be rewarded. So I'm hugely grateful to you, Thumeka, for giving us your time and for all your hard work and making sure, as I said earlier in the comments, I know that Rhodes University has got one of the lowest rejection rates from the DHET in terms of our applications. And presumably this is because we have people such as Thumeka sitting and just double checking, have you got the right letter from the editor? Have you got the date filled in correctly? Is this actually an accredited journal? And I'd just like you to know that we really, really appreciate all that hard work, and we appreciate this presentation this afternoon. I will send the recording out to everyone who signed up for the session in case you'd like to access that. Thank you, Thumeka. Thank you, everybody, and keep well.
Thank you. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, colleagues. And then, Sue, the documents I promised to send, do I send to individuals or to you, and then you can share?
If you send it to me, I'll send it out with the recording. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you.
Thanks. Hey. Cheers, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.